Hello and welcome to Brand New Thought. I'm your host Razmik Sargassian, and this is season 3, episode 2. In this episode, we will talk about small bigs, or the concept of small big. The idea is to find the smallest changes we can make in terms of how we communicate to other people, or even smallest changes we can make about our perception of who we really are. Essentially, anything small we can do that is likely to yield big results, big meaningful results for us. But before we get into the concept and specific tips on how to find the small bigs, let me actually give you an example of a small big. And this is from an actual research conducted in 1978. So imagine a university library, and there is a copy machine, and there's a line near the copy machine. A woman walks to the front of that line and asks the person standing there if she can go ahead. Essentially, she's asking to cut through the queue. So she says, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine?" And about 6 in 10 people say yes, which to me is already very interesting. It's the good old ask and it's given. So in a similar situation, know that you have 60% chance of people saying yes. But the more interesting parts of this research are the second and third iterations. So she tries the second version. Again, it's the same line, 5 pages, but now when she makes the ask, she's adding a reason. She says, "May I use the Xerox machine because I'm in a rush?" And compliance jumps past 90%. So from 60% to 90%, which is quite fascinating. In a way, this is quite logical. She gives them a reason, and people respond to reasons. They presume that the ask is more justified. But the third version brings a new light to this idea. In the third version, she says, "May I use the Xerox machine because I have to make copies?" If you think about it, everyone in that line has to make copies. This is why there's a line. So the sentence or the idea in and of itself does not carry information or new information. But again, 93% this time say yes. And it's very interesting. This experiment was originally run by Dr. Ellen Langer. If you're not familiar with her content, I can highly recommend it to you, especially if you're interested in personal development, self-realization, and mindfulness. But so let's go back to small bigs. This was an example of a small big, and the term comes, or at least originally I learned about this from another researcher, Dr. Robert Cialdini, who was a professor emeritus at Arizona State University. So a small big is not a little trick that works, because plenty of things work. A small big is a change where the effort you put in and the results you get out of it are wildly out of proportion. So almost zero cost or zero cost, but real movement. And this means that these are moves that our intuition does not really hand us. So intuition says add. In most cases, when you're working, let's say in a business context, you may think of let's add budget, or let's add more effort, or we're working on our own personal development. We may want to add some willpower. Or I work in marketing, so when you write, you may have a temptation to add another paragraph that will explain what you're trying to communicate and why that is the most important thing. So small bigs are not necessarily intuitive, they're counterintuitive, although there's an aspect to them, intuitive aspect to them that we'll talk about. So the small big just talks about the movement that you actually want and is aligning with something that is already at work. So if we go back to the experiment that I shared, why did adding a word like because, can I use the copy machine because I have to make copies, why does it do anything at all? And Langer's answer is that most low stakes social life runs on scripts. I think this research paper was called something like mindlessness of decisions or mindlessness of something. So essentially, the concept is that uh, there's a script. So the script here is a request plus justification. And when the stakes are low, and in this case, let's presume they were low, you're giving up your place in a queue. That's not that big of a thing. But so when the stakes are low, we check that the structure showed up, the structure being request plus justification. And because we see that the structure is there, we don't really think about the contents or how reasonable it is. So the word because is a marker, a sign that the justification has arrived. And the brain is a bit of a lazy thing. It is trying to conserve energy. So there, so much of research in behavioral science points to this. It is presuming that the script is satisfied, so the meaning doesn't really get read. And if you think about it, this kind of is dangerous. If you kind of audit or think about all the daily decisions you make, to what degree are you really looking into the content of the asks that you receive, or are we just running it on script? So in this experiment, the word in and of itself didn't install anything new. It didn't really persuade anyone, but it landed on top of a mechanism that had been already running in every person in that line. And so it lets the mechanism to do the work. And I've been thinking, before recording this episode, I've been thinking about small bigs. I started applying this concept primarily in marketing and in communications, but then I loved it so much that it just started curling into every other aspect of my life, especially personal development or goals that I have in terms of my mental and physical health. In somewhat more spiritual communities, a term that is being used is the path of least resistance. So this is not really a new concept, but I've been thinking about how do we best decide what is a small big? What can we understand that will help us take advantage of this concept? So in that sense, I want to share two things. Number one, every small big that I know is already riding something, so to say. So the tip here is to align with what's already at play. In one of the previous episodes, we talked about principles and finding axiomatic truths that are just true, no matter we believe in that or not. So look for the principle that would still be operating if you never opened your mouth, or something true about the situation or about people in general that doesn't really need your belief to work. And Dr. Cialdini actually spent I think over 40 years mapping some of these principles when it comes to contexts where we have to persuade other people or move people into a certain direction. And he coined these principles: reciprocity, liking, authority. I often, in this podcast, I talk about Sydney Banks and the principles of mind, consciousness, and thought. So these are all examples of principles, things that are just true. I'll give you an example. The principle of consistency is another principle that has been ascertained by research, and it is essentially the idea that we want to be consistent with our previous choices, especially if these choices have been communicated publicly to other people. So a very small, trivial example from my own life is I know that when I meditate twice a day, my day is so much better and I get so much out of my meditation practice, and I've known that for years. So to increase the likelihood of me complying with my goal to meditate twice a day, I simply take a note especially when I journal at the end of the day, that I will meditate twice a day. It's very simple. But because of the principle of consistency, and because I expressed it more in a form that is more than just thinking it, I've actually taken a note about it with my own hand. I don't think there has ever been an occasion when I have taken a note and haven't complied. So You can use these principles on almost any aspect of your life. So I'll also give another example from research. This one is from 1966 by Friedman and Fraser. Essentially, the researchers went door to door asking homeowners in United States to put a billboard on their front lawn that says "Drive carefully," and they deliberately choose large, kind of ugly billboards that are deliberately ugly and are blocking most of the view of their house. As you can presume, most people would say no to this request, and 17%, only 17% said yes. Now they do the second experiment, and in the second group, again the same ugly billboard, but the thing that changed is that 2 weeks earlier, a different person had knocked on these people's doors and asked for something more trivial. They asked to put a small sign in their windows that says, "Be a safe driver." And this is kind of like a neutral ask, so almost everyone agreed to it. It doesn't really cost them anything. But when the actual billboard request came, this time instead of 17%, 76% of the people said yes. And this is very interesting. They also run another version where the first small request had nothing to do with driving at all. They asked people to sign a petition to keep California beautiful, I think. A completely different topic. But still, those people still took the billboard, and roughly 47% did that. The first act hadn't really changed their views on road safety or anything that relates to that specific ask, but it had changed their view of themselves into someone who takes action on public matters. So refusing now would mean contradicting who they are or who they think they are, which essentially I'm hinting is what they are at the moment. So essentially, what happened here is before the primary asked, they got another ask, and they because they complied, they already think of themselves as someone who cares about these types of public matters. So the tip here, in terms of finding the small changes that are likely to yield the biggest changes, is you have to find some sort of a principle, some sort of a truth that stands on its own, something that you don't need to believe in. There is a term in Ayurvedic kind of language, which is support of nature. They often talk about how certain desires or actions get support of nature, but I think about it in a more scientific term. Whenever you're designing something and the logic of it, the physics of it is already aligned with how things work, then the likelihood of success is so much higher. And the second way to find the small big is somewhat counterintuitive. It is think about the big first. Define for yourself what is that big change that you would like to have in a very concrete way. Because so often, especially now, we're getting so much information about all kinds of techniques and tips and tactics, and then we're trying to kind of squeeze the effects out of them and fit them into different parts of our lives. But I've found that when I define the desired outcome in concrete terms and then hold a consistent line of thinking in terms of what's something that would move the needle here, the mind just has no choice than to give us ideas. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. If you found the concept of small bigs interesting or intriguing, this is something that I have thought about and written about quite a lot, especially in the context of communications, marketing, and personal development. So if you want to learn more, you can go to smallbig.agency, where you will learn a lot of concrete examples and free resources. And if you've been enjoying this episodes, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This is the smallest thing you could do that would support me. This is Brand New Thought. I'm Razmik Sargsyan, and I'll be back with another episode soon. Goodbye.